The early days, oh, a better nation, fair and free, Scotland.
Hello, this is Scottish Indepence podcast episode number 139. I almost said episode 140 there because this would have been episode 140. It's just that I recorded episode 139 with Adam Ramsey last week and the file went missing. The reason the file went missing was due to problems with the sound card caused by the latest Windows update. So one of the things I'm suggesting for the new independent Scotland is targeted strikes against Bill Gates. So with the Adam Ramsey interview, we have the option of doing it again, which we've discussed, or we could maybe simply just pretend that the content was so extraordinary that it's been taken offline for national security reasons. We haven't quite decided what's the way to go yet. For this particular interview, sound problems increased, but I just recorded it on about 8 different programs just to make sure that I got it and then cobbled it together. So we've got the full interview except for one question, which went missing as well. I think I've got to the bottom of these problems, so it won't be happening again, and if not, I'll be buying a new computer. Anyway, on to this episode. This is Billy Kay. For years, Billy has been writing and broadcasting and producing material on Scottish culture and Scots language. He's been doing it for the BBC and internationally, and very often on the speaking circuit. At the moment, he's also got a programme you can find on BBC iPlayer called Scotland's Black History. Billy's the perfect man to ask about the importance of building Scottish cultural awareness and confidence before any second referendum, and also about the history of that activity of filling the gaps that people have in their awareness of the history and culture of Scotland. So, we'll go to the conversation. I hope you enjoy it, and at the end I think I'll have a wee Robert-the-Brucie bonus for you. So, here's the conversation, and I'll have a wee word with you after. Hi Billy, how's it going?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
I was just looking back at the last time you were on the show, and it was actually Burns Night 2014.
Was it that long ago? It was before the referendum, was it?
It was indeed, yeah.
Heavens. Yes, few things have gone down since then, and despite all the hassles and the deep depression of September that year, I'm still optimistic. I'm still pretty sure it'll happen in my lifetime. So there's a great Scots expression which is "Hod for it," go straight ahead, breathe in, do your best, and that's what we'll have to do to make sure that it does happen. And I think it will happen, certainly in my lifetime, and probably in the next 10 years, I would think.
I saw you in a video recently, and another of the major things that's happened since then is Brexit. And just before we get on to like some more harder topics, can I ask you about something you were saying in that video? Because you were talking about the influences of other European languages on Scots. You know, Scotland's always been quite European in a way, and there's some interesting things for the listeners to know there, I think.
Yes, yes, the Scots language is full of loan words that came through our contact with various groups in Europe. The Old Alliance from France gave us, for example, in the boroughs, the old boroughs that were established in the 12th and 13th century. Like I'm looking over the Firth of Tay to Dundee just now, and there's a West Port and an East Port in Dundee from La Porte, the gate. There are venels or lanes from La Benelle, the lane, in various old towns like Irvine. The bailey and the provost are words that come in from French, Norman French, into Scots. And a lot of words to do with food and wine. For example, la tasse, the cup, gave us tassie, as in Burns's silver tassie. And assiette, a plate, gave us assiette, which is what steak pies come in at New Year time. From Dutch, you've got words like to hunker doon, to go doon your hunkers, and your queets, your ankles. From Scandinavian languages, you've got your lugs and your loof. Your loof is the palm of your hand. And from Latin, going really way back because of the great Latin tradition in Scots and medieval Scotland, you've got words like domini for a teacher, and the dux, the best pupil in the class. You've got some words that also come in from Gaelic to do with the topography. So place names like Bens and Glens and Straths come in from Gaelic. So the Scots language is absolutely hoaching with words and expressions that come from other European languages.
And to get on to the main topic, when the last referendum came round, a lot of people were talking about the importance of building up cultural confidence, and it's a slow process, but people like yourself have been working on it for a long time. I think after the first referendum, a lot of people thought it might be a long time before we get another chance, maybe 10, 15 years, and that we'd need to work very hard on that process of building cultural confidence even more. But now, given the fact that it could be here within 2 years, a year and a half, 3 years, nobody's quite sure, where does that leave that project about building up Scottish cultural confidence? Because for me it's always been very important, and for you, obviously, you've spent a lifetime doing it. Where do you think we are with that?
Well, I keep thinking of what the Catalans say about political activity and political confidence and being a naturally developed country politically that leads to cultural confidence. They talk about the slave mentality, and they said when they got political autonomy after the death of Franco, it would take several generations to remove what they called the slave mentality. We refer to this as the Scottish cringe, which a lot of Scots grow up with because of the inferiorization of their culture in education and the media. So that is not going to change. I mean, I'm afraid we still hear examples and discover examples of that all the time, especially among the people who voted no, who didn't have the confidence to vote pro-Scottish in that last referendum. So it would take generations to change that completely, but the younger generation, fortunately, isn't as prone to the cultural cringe as the older generation is. So with each literally passing decade, the number of people who've got the cringe, I think, is diminishing, and a more confident young generation is coming forward. And thinking back to the referendum, it was mainly the younger generation that generated so much excitement, cultural excitement, during the referendum campaign, but organising all these Artists for Independence gigs and all the plethora of things that were going on across Scotland. It was them that generated that excitement, and everyone agreed that it was one of the best times of their life in the creation of that excitement. So they're all there, and they'll be back out in the streets again come another referendum, and more young activists will be added to them, and old codgers like me will be desperate to join them once again, because it was some buzz taking part in those things. So it's a balancing act between the fact that for generations Scots have looked over their shoulder to London for cultural approval. You've had people who've resisted that tremendously, people like McDermott, Burns, Stevenson, through to our own day, but you've still got that to overcome. But the artists have always been at the head of the curve as far as political activity in Scotland's concerned. The artists have always thought independence before the politicians and the masses got round to thinking independence. So the artists are still at the forefront of that and given a sniff of another chance. The activity, I mean, for example, I would have loved in the last referendum, I would have loved to have dropped everything and just devoted myself to that cause. I couldn't at that time, but now I'm a bit older and my children are all up and away across Europe. We can talk about that later on, the effect of Brexit. But I'd now be in a position where I would do whatever it took to promote independence in the next referendum. And I literally would drop everything and do anything I could for that to happen, because ultimately that is the greatest thing that can happen to Scotland, is independence.
Obviously I agree there, but do you think that one of the reasons that people look over their shoulder to London, as you said, is that, you know, Scottish arts, Scottish television, Scottish film, in a way, is massively underfunded? And as a sort of follow-up question to that, do you think that underfunding is deliberate, or just comes from a kind of London-centric view of the world?
Probably the simple answer would be both, in that the kind of programs and the kind of series historically that have been promoted have not been ones that would foster the cultural confidence that would lead to a desire for independence. But then there's also the provincial mentality among those who have got a career structure to follow in the media, and the career structure is a British career structure. Then those people are not going to rock the boat when it comes to, again, promoting the kind of material that would foster an independent spirit in Scotland. So you've got these different things happening. There's a great line in Willie McIlvanney's novel, The Big Man, where the hero arrives in Edinburgh and he's commenting on the street names referring to the British Hanoverian dynasty, Princes Street and Hanover Street, etc., etc. And he concludes, Scottishness was a life, but Britishness was a career. Well, the British media is dominated by Scots who are part of that career structure of Britishness being a career rather than Scottishness being a career. And there are many people within that structure who politically would welcome Scottish independence. I know a lot of people, despite its reputation, I know a lot of people who work for the BBC who would vote and who did vote for Scottish independence. But the career structure is such and the corporation structure is such that it would almost have been political and cultural and career suicide for them to have come out as supporting that as part of their world picture within the BBC.
It makes me think of that old quote about it's very hard to make a man understand something when his job depends on him not understanding it.
Yeah, something like that.
But so do you think that exact thing that you've described was heavily involved in all the shenanigans around the BBC with the Scottish Six and yes, there's going to be and no, there's not, and it's an argument that's been going on forever. Do you think what you're describing there was visible during that argument?
I think it was, yes. I think it was. And I think the referendum, and literally for 2 years before the referendum, then the people were beginning to get paranoid about the referendum. So really you could say that for about a 3-year period, that was definitely off the agenda. So I think that did affect the way people perceive things. Now that we've got a lull before the next referendum, and the pressure has built since the referendum because people in the media are aware of the number of people they've lost as viewers and listeners because of what was perceived as a bias against Scottish independence. The number of people they've lost is concerning them. So I think they'd be more likely to promote that now than they were in the past. Having said that, it's a tiny, tiny advance even to get a Scottish 6 o'clock news. What we should have are full channels representing Scottish culture and Scottish politics and everything to do with a normal nation, not just the occasional half-hour programme or hour-long documentary, but a full radio and television channels, which is the case I'm sure is the case in Catalonia and Galicia and the Basque Country in Spain.
There are plenty of other places too, even Malta with 500,000 people, and they've got 3 or 4 channels, and I'm sure there's a group somewhere in Eastern Europe, there's 50,000 people and they've got one channel. Or the Faroe Islands have got a channel. Why is it so difficult to do in Scotland?
Exactly. That's what it comes down to. And that you could definitely make a strong case for saying that the reason why it hasn't happened or hasn't been promoted is the fear of Scottish nationalism. And this latent thing that is with all Scots, even unionism. When I give talks on Scottish culture to audiences, and have done for many years, on things like the Scots abroad or the Scots language, or even